Hey, what's up everyone, Danny here. World of Warcraft Classic came out not too long ago, and oh my goodness is it filled with so much goodness. Classic coming out is really important because up until this release, there was no legal way to play the game as it was 15 years ago. This is a really big title that was a huge phenomenon when it came out, and it reached far beyond the gaming space, and there's no way to experience it. It's not like a game on your console from Nintendo or Super Nintendo era where you can just pop in a game and play it anytime you want. WoW is an exclusive online game that has a persistent world that exists on servers, so you couldn't play the older versions after the new patches or expansions came out, which did reshape the game permanently each time they did. Well, you kind of could because there are private servers, but those were not as reliable methods of playing because your character and the whole server could be deleted at any moment due to a cease and desist from Blizzard or just private server corruption and drama. So WoW Classic coming out is a way for everyone to experience the magic of the game as it was 15 years ago, because a big chunk of gamers right now were probably either not born at the time or were too young to even have a chance to play it back then. In this video, we're going to see how WoW Classic runs on a cheap computer for those of you who wanted to hop in and try it out without spending a ton of money. And this will not be a gaming computer, initially anyways, and it should be easily accessible for less than $100. So let's check it out. So we're going to be checking out WoW Classic on the Dell Optiplex 790. These are some of my favorite low-cost systems ever, and I've used the Optiplex line on the channel in the past on multiple occasions. I've used whole pre-builts as well as standalone components pulled from them, since there are a ton of these in existence that are constantly being phased out from businesses and schools, so everything about them is pretty inexpensive. This Optiplex in particular actually came from Upcycle Computer Works, aka UCW. I'm teaming up with them for this video because I really like what they're doing in the used computer space. They're a company based in Chicago that refurbishes, upgrades, and repairs used PCs. Their mission is to keep machines out of landfills as long as they're usable for as long as possible. For every 10 computers that they sell, they donate one to at-risk youth who cannot afford one of their own. They believe that having a good working computer is a right that everyone should have, and I'm definitely on board with that. I'll give you more details on how you can get a similar system later on in the video if you're interested, after we check out all the specs and see how it performs with WoW. So this specific machine uses a processor from the legendary Intel Sandy Bridge line, the i5-2400, with integrated HD 2000 graphics. It has 8GB of DDR3 system memory and a 750GB mechanical drive. It's got a Dell OEM motherboard in it, so there's not too many bells and whistles with regards to the BIOS or extra features, and it lacks USB 3.0 support. It has a 265 watt OEM power supply with no external PCIe power connectors, so you're pretty limited to graphics cards you can use unless you upgrade the power supply. One really cool thing though is that it does have DisplayPort out, which I find to be really nice so that you're not locked into using VGA even with integrated graphics. So that's the quick rundown of the system. Now let's talk about the minimum required specs for WoW Classic. This is a re-release of the game as close as they could get it to how it was 15 years ago, but it's not a one-to-one replica due to a handful of technical reasons that was actually covered during a dedicated Blizzcon panel, and I'll have that linked in the description below for those of you who are curious. But the system requirements have changed due to the modernization of the game for it to work in this day and age. Don't worry though, if you do want it to look like it did 15 years ago, they do have graphic settings for that, and it's actually a 3 out of 10 on the preset graphic sliders. I actually have an original vanilla box right here, so let's take a look at what it required back then, since the minimum system specs is printed right at the bottom of the box, and compare it to what WoW Classic requires now. In 2004, the minimum system requirements called for either Windows 98, ME 2000, or XP, and you had to have at least an Intel Pentium 3 800MHz or AMD Athlon 800MHz processor, 256 megabytes of system memory, that's megabytes there, and at least a 32 megabyte graphics card such as an NVIDIA GeForce 2 class card or above, DirectX 9, 4 gigabytes of space on your hard drive, 4x CD-ROM drive so that you can install it with the discs it came with, and at least 56K or better internet connection. The recommended specs are in here as well. I'm not going to read them out though, but feel free to pause the video if you want to check them out for yourself. For modern day WoW Classic, the minimum requirements are at least Windows 7, an Intel E6600 or AMD Phenom 8750, which will be more than fine since the i5-2400 is way better than those, at least an 8800 GT from Nvidia or HD 4850 from AMD, or Intel HD 4000 integrated graphics. We're going to fall a bit short here because we've only got Intel HD 2000 graphics, which is 2 generations prior to that. But for system memory, they call for 2 GB of RAM, which we've got covered because we have quadruple that amount, 5 GB of storage, which we also have plenty of, broadband internet, and a minimum display resolution of 1024 by 768. So this system pretty much passes with flying colors for all the specs except in the graphics department, but let's see how it performs. I first tried to play at 1080p and I started with the lowest graphics available. That's a 1 out of 10 on the preset slider. Here I am in Hillsbrad Foothills killing the beasts right outside of town, and I was getting roughly 19 FPS average with 9 FPS 1% and 4 FPS 0.1% lows. Those are some pretty bad numbers if you ask me, but it was still playable to some degree. You know, I was able to quest and kill mobs, and I even engaged in a little bit of PvP. It just wasn't the most ideal experience. At the same settings, except in a major capital city like Stormwind, where there's a lot more going on, you know, there's people running around everywhere, there's people sitting AFK at the bank, mailbox, and auction house, the average FPS dropped a couple of points to 17, so there isn't a huge difference whether you're out in the world questing or if you're in a populated city. Again, I was still able to get stuff done, it just wasn't the most enjoyable experience since I'm used to playing on my own personal PC, which maxes this game out no problems. These results make sense though. We're using integrated graphics that are 2 generations behind from what they recommend as the bare minimum. So to try to get a smoother experience, I dropped the render scale down to the equivalent of 720p and I kept it at the same lowest graphics quality, and the performance improved by a lot. The average FPS got really close to hitting that 30 FPS, which is what I would consider very playable. It was just shy at 27, with 19 FPS as the 1% and 8 FPS as the 0.1% lows. In search for that average 30 FPS with this system, I decided to drop the resolution even further. So I lowered the render scale to the equivalent of 640 by 360, which is 1/9 the pixel density of 1080p. Check out those sweet graphics. At these settings, it looks like we're back in 2004. Actually, probably even worse because even back then I was playing at 800 by 600. Unfortunately, the average FPS does not get much better. It still barely misses that average 30 FPS we're targeting. However, it did feel a lot smoother since the 1 and 0.1% were both now above 20. Now I know what you're thinking. Danny, what happens if we try to go the exact opposite direction and try to run the game at max settings at 1080p on this system? And I knew you were going to ask that question, so I went ahead and tested that too. What you're seeing here is the actual performance, an astounding 3 FPS average with 1 and 0.1% lows of 1 FPS. Are we still playing a game here, or are we flipping through still images? I don't even know. So jokes aside, the overall performance of the system at the most optimized settings was a bit short of ideal. It gets you in the game and you're still able to do stuff, but I think most people will likely want more than that. So that leads me to the next part of the video, which is what I've always loved about these Optiplexes and most pre-builts in general, and that is their potential to be elevated and how cheap it is to do so, because you're only really lacking one thing in this build, and that's dedicated graphics. The Sandy Bridge CPUs are still very capable of delivering a good modern gaming experience for their price, and all you need in order to boost the performance drastically is to throw in a graphics card that is completely powered through the PCI Express slot. I was recently able to pick up a GTX 1050 for $50 in my local market through OfferUp, and I slapped it in the machine, and now let's check out the performance after this upgrade. I cranked all the settings up to max at 1080p, and it was a night and day difference. The gameplay was super smooth. I was running around the very busy Stormwind City and I was getting over 100 FPS average, and the 0.1% lows were right near that 60 FPS mark. Out in the world, questing and killing mobs, the average went down a bit to the mid 80s, but the 1% and 0.1% lows were at 60 FPS or higher. I'd say these numbers are pretty ideal for a system coming in at a total of $150 or less. With that said, if you guys are interested in buying one of these Optiplexes or something similar, definitely check out UCW's website, which I'll have linked down below in the description. And you can get the exact model that I showed in this video for $75. And if you use a special coupon code NOAB, that's NOAB at checkout, you can get an additional $10 off. To get the prices of these systems as low as possible, UCW does not pre-install Windows on them. They do, however, come with a Windows 7 key from the sticker on the case, which I was able to actually use with a Windows 10 install, and it activated with no issues. You just have to create your own like USB media device. There are other configurations which, go down to as low as an i3, which is a little bit cheaper, or an i7, which is going to cost a bit more. For WoW Classic and to be able to play other modern titles that are a bit harder to run, I'd recommend getting at least an i5 and you're going to be set. But yeah, anyways, that's going to wrap it up with this video. I hope you all enjoyed and found it either helpful or entertaining in some way. Let me know your thoughts on these Optiplex systems in general, and if you have any other questions, definitely let me know in the comments below, and myself or other helpful members of the community will try to answer them. Also, let me know if you are playing Classic WoW, or if you have any interest in it at all, or if you're just like, you don't care, because I'm really curious how many people care versus how many that don't. But yeah, I want to thank Chris over at UCW for teaming up with me on this video, and I want to thank you all, as always, for watching and for your continuous support of the channel. I'll see you all in the comments as well as in the next video. Bye.